of one of these grand programs, but it is possible to do this stuff. It just depends on whether the audience is, kind of in the right space for it. You had those films coming out, and they're the obvious comparison. That was one of the problems too, I think. But I'm one of those people who support the musical. I'd like to see it resurrected.
Well, that's interesting. I had never seen it, and the clips that I did see of it weren't that appealing to me. But of course, I didn't see it as a whole piece of art. So that's interesting. I'd like to. I wonder if it's available on if it's ever been filmed and put to DVD.
I don't know if there's anything like that available either. It would be good. I don't know why they're not making that available, actually. But I think Michael Theriault's portrayal of Gollum was just brilliant physical work. They kind of made you forget that, the actors who were playing hobbits weren't any less tall than the other actors. There was just a number of things that somehow they must have succeeded because they just created a total world on a stage with only the resources available in a theater like that.
Wow, that's amazing. I'd like to be able to see that.
Yeah, I feel like some people missed out because there was kind of bad press going around. But the critics were, as usual, they're pretty savage with these things. And we know that some things that we take for granted as being incredibly important works now were panned at the time they first were performed, including some of, like the Magic Flute or one of the Mozart. Because we watched Amadeus recently again. And, it's never a given. The original showing of something might just be an absolute disaster, but then, it starts to get word of mouth and whatever. Someone restages it, and suddenly it's the right time, the right place, or something. Well, how about just what would your dream project be, Dr. Olsen, and why?
Well, that's a really interesting question. I mean, I think that, in some ways, my dream project is kind of the one that I'm doing. It's sort of the reason I'm doing it because it was my dream project. I mean, the thing that I most love to do is, I think of as an academic, and I'm still comparatively new at the academic thing. It was only 7 years ago I got my PhD, and as a young professor, the main thing that everybody tells you, that the two primary things that you're focusing on in your academic life are your teaching and your scholarship. And these two things are always, they're kept in completely separate buckets. The time is different. And the concept is that these are just in many ways, totally different things. You've got your esoteric scholarship that you work on essentially really only for the benefit of other scholars. I mean, there's almost no even expectation, unless you happen to be some kind of obscure superstar or happen to work in a field which other people are interested in, that anyone else is going to read what you write or be interested in what you do or say other than other people in your field. And then, of course, there's the teaching. Then there's the version of it that you give to, the small group of 18 to 22-year-old people who are sitting in your classes. And, I've just sort of been increasingly frustrated by the compartmentalizing of things and by the parochial focus of academia. The way in which we don't, so basically there are kind of two acceptable audiences for the work that I do. Either, I teach at a small school, so my classes are small. So for me, it's, I can either focus on the 25 18 to 22-year-olds who happen to be sitting in that room that I'm supposed to go teach in, or I can focus on, what feels like an approximately equal size number of other scholars out there who are going to be interested in what I'm saying. I mean, the circulation for scholarly journals and scholarly monographs and stuff like that is very small. I mean, we're usually talking at most hundreds of copies, not thousands. And so there's a really small there's a really small audience out there. And basically, I've been sort of increasingly frustrated with that and thinking, it would be, basically starting first with the premise. I think there are lots of people out there who would be really interested in actually getting into a discussion about this, where I could sort of take both the stuff that I do in the classroom and the stuff that I would do for publication and really just bring it to a wider audience and have a broader conversation, involve, the other 99.99% of the population, or at least make it available to to the rest of them, and really expand it rather than just like my undergrad students and a select group of other scholars. And So that's basically why I started my podcast. And as I've been working on it and I've been, sort of developing new things and doing, kind of experimenting with new stuff as I've been going along, it's all really sort of focused on that one central idea. Now that's kind of broad, for me from the beginning. It's been Tolkien specific because that was sort of my primary passion, and also a conversation that, of course, I was sort of figuring there would be a lot of people who would want to get involved in right away. Of course, I have sort of subversive ideas that after a while, after I've been having these conversations with Tolkien with a lot of people for a while and getting a lot of people engaged and interested in this, that sometime in the future I shall shift gears on them and also start talking about Chaucer and Sir Thomas Malory and many of the other authors that I really love.
You promised you wouldn't talk about them.
Exactly. It's just like I'm sort of lulling people into complacency, and then pretty soon I'm going to be springing Middle English on them before they realize it. But no, I mean, and I just think because I just think there's so many opportunities, and it's so the narrowness of the scope of academic endeavor in general it just seems to me really silly. And I think, maybe it used to have to be that way, maybe, but it doesn't anymore, and especially with new technology and with the ways in which you can very easily make connections with people over the internet and really find people and have meaningful exchanges and discussions. I've been really enjoying that. So for me, as a teaching project, as a scholarly project, I really see it as both. I mean, it's another thing, conversations that I've had with colleagues here and even with my dean here, and they still see, okay, well, obviously teaching and scholarship is different. So, they understand that I'm doing this podcast, and they understand that I'm talking about Tolkien with lots of people and, different ages and around the world and stuff like that. But basically, they still clearly categorize this as, okay, what you're doing, though, that's the teaching category, right? What you're doing isn't real scholarship, the kind of thing that you would publish in journals. And what I've been contending all along is no. I mean, when I do things like my Hobbit lecture series and stuff, I'm not. When I do my podcast, my intention is I never dumb it down. For me, there's no distinction between like sophisticated and esoteric things I would only say to other scholars, and and not to the general common people out there. To me, that doesn't make any sense. And I think that if you can, if you have things to say about books as a literary, analyst, as I am. I mean, if there are things that I would want to say that I would want to publish in Tolkien Studies or that I would want to publish in, the Chaucer Review or whatever, I should be able to say them in such a way that anyone could understand it. Like that's a rhetorical choice. That's not an intellectual choice. And so for me, I want to combine those two things. So with Tolkien, it's been kind of, that's why one of the reasons I chose Tolkien first is that this has sort of been my dream, that being able to have these kinds of conversations, being able to sort of share my own love for Tolkien and the things that I see in his stories that make them so exciting for me to think about and to be able to share those with other people. I mean, as the reason I am an academic at all, the reason I got into teaching was because of my love to share this stuff with people. So being able to do that with more people and with a broader selection of people all over the place, it has been really cool.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a very dynamic situation when you think about it, because your sort of focus is on another professor, a man who balanced, his ability to communicate with ordinary people, via this concept of a hobbit and its culture and the stories and all of the rest of it, and this sort of love of stories and adventure and this kind of basic passion he had for that, as well as rigorous disciplines of linguistics and philology and English literature and the sort of high-minded things of that kind as well. And we know he was one unbelievably deep person. So yes. I can imagine him being an incredibly interesting subject of almost endless study as well, and yet because he has this kind of reputation as being this children's author, how limiting is that? What was the author of Lewis Carroll was a mathematician, but like he's just a children's author, though. So, like people just want to put these things in a little box, and it's so silly. It must be really frustrating. That would have been a good question for me. I feel that there's a certain amount of prejudice attending on this stuff. So I know that's been a problem for others, like Jane Chance or others who tried to put it on the syllabus.
No, definitely. I mean, there have definitely been issues with that. I mean, it's interesting. In fact, I find it to be a really fascinating kind of cultural phenomenon. I mean, and I'd have to say almost mindless reaction that people have, sort of mindless antipathy that people have to fantasy work in general. And I say mindless. I can't think of any other way to describe it. I've never heard an argument against it. It's like so many people just simply not only assume that the argument doesn't need to be made, but the kind of derision which just immediately comes in. I mean, people are, sort of assume not only that it's a given that fantasy literature is not real literature and is less worthy than others, but that anyone who suggests contrary is sort of opening themselves to obvious ridicule. I mean, I find it really striking. I find there are very few other things of which that's true. I mean, you can study almost anything you want in today's academia, and it's fine. I mean, if I wanted to say, I'm going to write a book on, like some kind of really obscure branch of, like some like really, I don't know, some like really tawdry kind of 19th century popular magazine or something like that, for which there's no literary claim at all, right? But if I want to say I want to study that, well, that's interesting, then there's like a whole school of thought which talks about how interesting things like that are. But if I want to say I want to study fantasy literature, people look at me funny. I mean, it's like you can, I find it odd. I said there's some kind of, I haven't yet really figured it out, but there's some kind of cultural phenomenon there. I don't know what it is, but it is very deeply ingrained.
I agree, and that I find it odd as well, but I've thought about the phenomenon quite a bit, and to me, I actually appreciate the phenomenon because for me, it's very telling of where the society is at. To not be able to embrace imagination and celebrate it, I think is very telling of the current state. And maybe it's always been this way with humanity in general, I guess you could say.
Well, we know Tolkien encountered it too, that kind of prejudice where his fellow professors sort of turned up their nose at a man who would be a popular author. Well, that brings disrepute onto us, doesn't it? I mean, the ivory tower is, not safe with this guy in here.
Right. Well, I think there's a certain sense, especially in the modern age, of a repudiation of anything that's not specifically scientifically backed, as far as being worthy of study. If it's not scientifically backed, or if it doesn't earn you a lot of money, there seems to be some sort of aversion towards it, and obviously we know that that's a shame because the imagination and reflection upon yourself through fantasy and through imagination is so important to the human soul. I think it's rather telling of the current status of things that there is that actual aversion, whether it be in the scholastic level or just in some area of the general populace, that, well, that's just stupid stuff. It's just kids' tales. What are you dealing with that for? But the fact that it's there, I think, is telling to us who appreciate it, and I think we can probably suspect why it's there.
Mm-hmm. Well, and we wouldn't want it to be too easy. Heaven forbid it would be too easy.
Right. Well, it seems tinged with almost a kind of anxiety. It almost sounds like fear at times. the particular emphasis of the knee-jerk reaction against it, or the sort of inexplicable fervor of its condemnation.
Right.
At least